Please, take care of these two for me," he begged. I couldn't help but feel utterly exasperated with him. The nerve of him to ask me to even take care of his mistress was just outrageous. "What? Why don't you ask your parents?" "What are you saying? Should I make my elderly parents take on such a burden? You're heartless." "Oh, your mother-in-law would probably be delighted to help, wouldn't she? And what position are you in to be saying such things?" Mark, my husband, despite being in a position to ask for help, never lost his arrogant attitude. Watching him, I couldn't help but wonder what I ever saw in him. "Excuse me, coming through." Just then, a new bed was brought in next to us. I glanced over, recognized who it was, and couldn't help but scream. "What? Ivy?" The woman in the bed was someone I knew very well. "I never imagined you were Mark's mistress," I said glaringly, and she looked away. "Now, what am I supposed to do with them?" "We're family, so help us out, will you?" While watching the two of them cling to me, begging for help, I found myself deep in thought. My name is Hazel Smith. I'm a 35-year-old housewife raising a lovely 10-year-old son, Sebastian. I have a younger sister, Ivy, who is 6 years younger, and frankly, we've never gotten along. Ivy was irresponsible and ran off with a man as soon as she graduated high school. "I'm sorry, Hazel. I know I shouldn't be causing you stress right now." My parents lamented over Ivy's choices and made sure it didn't bring mental unstableness on me. They didn't want to worry me as I was pregnant at the time. However, they had no choice but to inform me after Ivy ran off with all the family's savings. That news did indeed cause me great mental distress. "Are you okay, Hazel? You need to prioritize your baby now." Mark had supported me during that time. He suggested I go back to my parents' place for the birth, which turned out to be a great help. It allowed me to support my parents financially with my savings and safely deliver Sebastian. By the way, I've since been repaid by my parents for that money. "Thank you, Mark. Your suggestion really helped me feel at ease." "Don't mention it. I asked you to quit your job for me, so it's the least I could do." Mark and I used to work at the same company. Mark had been my mentor at work. I admired how diligently he taught me, and his confession led to us dating. When I became pregnant with Sebastian, we decided to marry. He said, "I want my wife to be at home. If you don't mind, would you quit your job?" So, I decided to leave my job for marriage. Despite some regret about leaving work, it allowed me to support my family, which in hindsight, was a good thing. And it was good that Sebastian's birth brightened our home, which had been shadowed by Ivy's actions. "Hey, Mom. Need any help with anything? Could you clean the bathtub?" "Sure, leave it to me." Sebastian, now a big boy, is still so sweet and adorable. He plays energetically every day, does his homework when I ask. Sebastian's current obsession with helping around the house often had him asking if there was anything he could do. His excitement and willingness to help always bring a smile to my face. "All done. Thank you. Here's your allowance for helping out." Yay! He was thrilled, though I wondered if his eagerness to help was partly for the allowance. Regardless, living together as a family like this made me genuinely happy. One day, while I was busy with housework, Mark's mother called. "You haven't visited in a while. Come over this weekend and bring Sebastian. I'll prepare a feast." "I'm sorry, we already have plans for this weekend." "Really? Is it something that can't be rescheduled to another weekend?" "I'll talk it over with Mark," I said, trying to dodge a direct answer. It hadn't even been a month since our last visit. "I know she's not a bad person," I thought to myself. My in-laws are nice people, and I've never felt mistreated by them. However, Mark's mother adores her only son and her grandson, Sebastian. This made his parents eager to have us at his parents' house. It wasn't that I disliked going there. As a daughter-in-law, I wasn't overworked or mistreated. They treated me more like a guest, not even letting me help in the kitchen. However, being at the in-laws always required being on my toes. Sebastian takes after me, he's really bright. Good thing he doesn't take after Hazel in that regard. She was always slow at work, probably struggled with her studies too. Moreover, whenever we visited Mark's parents' house, Mark would start drinking from the daytime. He would then talk to his father in a way that belittled me. Hazel, you need to try a bit harder. His father would hear this and, without listening to my side, would chime in. Their remarks always made me uncomfortable. There was another issue I had. Grandma wants us to visit this weekend. What do you think, Sebastian? If it's Dad's mom, I don't really want to go. The issue was Sebastian's reluctance to visit. At 10 years old, he finds his grandparents' house boring. Their neighborhood is quiet with no parks or natural areas to play in. The backyard could have been a play area, but it's full of my father-in-law's flowers, making it difficult to run around. So, Sebastian brings his homework and PC games, but you don't need to do homework, Sebastian, you're smart enough. We don't understand these games and no fun, let's talk instead. They'd take away his entertainment. And my protests were met with a dismissive sure, from them, and Mark told me, it's okay once in a while. It's understandable, considering how uninteresting those visits were to him. I'd rather go out with you and Dad than visit Grandma's. Sebastian would sometimes suggest to Mark, but he would dismiss it, saying, visiting my family is our outing. Even when I try to advocate for Sebastian's wishes, Mark insists, catering to every whim isn't good for his upbringing. Mark claims this, but he's hardly been involved in Sebastian's upbringing. When Sebastian was a baby, Mark used my stay at my parents' house as an excuse to visit only occasionally. He left all the diaper changes and baths to me and my parents. He probably held our child only a handful of times. When I wanted to return home, Mark would insist, it's better for you to stay at your parents' for now. At the time, I thought he was being considerate, but now I see it as his reluctance to participate in parenting. Perhaps his eagerness to take Sebastian to his parents' house stems from not wanting to deal with him himself. Dad's just not interested in me, Sebastian said, echoing the sentiment about Mark. Hearing this, I couldn't help but feel troubled. This week, I had planned to take Sebastian to my parents' house. Therefore, I decided to talk to Mark when he returned home, hoping to somehow convince him to decline the visits. My parents' house should be the priority. But we went there almost every weekend last month, and it's only been a couple of weeks since. We haven't been to my parents' house in nearly a year, even though Sebastian spent time there as a baby. Mark's parents often insist on our visits because they didn't get to see Sebastian much when he was a baby. We couldn't see him much then, so now we want him here, they would say. To be clear, it's not like they never saw him as a baby. They even stayed at my parents' house for about a week. The in-laws had always been merely guests in our lives. Moreover, my parents saw Sebastian only a couple of times a year since we moved back to our place. Your parents' house is just boring for me. Enough. We've had this visit planned for 6 months. If you prefer your parents' house so much, why don't you go alone? Fine, I will. He replied easily. I wonder if he really cared about our family. I tried to shake off such thoughts, but they lingered. I started working from home to prepare for situations like this. It wasn't much, but it kept me from overthinking. And it helped me save a little. If I want Mark to be more supportive, I need to try too. I thought, trying to be objective. But my efforts seemed futile. Hi Dad, Mom, long time no see. Long time no see. Wow, look how much you've grown, Sebastian. Following our plans, I took Sebastian with me to visit my parents' home. Sebastian was delighted, and so were my parents. I practiced the game you like, Sebastian. Want to play together? Really? I'd love to. Oh, but I need to do my homework first. How responsible of you. Use the living room, dear. We'll prepare dinner while you finish your homework, they said, prioritizing Sebastian's needs. The contrast with Mark's parents made me feel uneasy. What's wrong? You seem troubled. My mother noticed and said. I took the opportunity to talk to her about everything while Sebastian was with my father. Indeed, we did monopolize your time with the baby, but that was only for about 2 months after he was born, right? Besides, it's wrong to ignore Sebastian's preferences and opinions. Honestly, I'm worried that continuing this marriage might not be best for Sebastian. I understand. Talk it through with Mark, and remember, you can always come back home. We're here for you. I was grateful for her understanding. I knew my father would say the same. That was what I was thinking at the time. I'm home. I heard a voice. And as my mother and I exchanged surprised looks, a woman with a little girl entered. Ivy, is that you? Hey sis, why are you here? It was Ivy, my sister, whom I hadn't seen in 10 years. The little girl, about Sebastian's age, was hiding behind her. Ivy? Why are you here, Ivy? Our parents were visibly shocked by her sudden return. Ivy, while casually placing her bags down, said, I'm tired. Just put these in a room for me, will you? Sebastian, sensing the odd atmosphere, hurried over to me. Ivy, what have you been doing all this time? Well, I got married to the guy I eloped. To summarize her story, she got married to the guy she eloped with and had Hannah. And then she had been living as a family of 3 but returned as a single mother after getting divorced. You're causing trouble again. Don't drag us into your mess. Dad scolded Ivy as she laughed it off. The children, seeing our father's anger, looked scared. Dad, calm down. The kids are frightened. Sorry. Dad said, calming down as he saw the children hiding behind their mothers. Thinking it wasn't good to continue the conversation in front of the children, I asked Sebastian to go to his room for a while. So, Ivy, what do you plan to do now? Mom asked once Sebastian was out of the room. I'll stay here. I can't raise Hannah by myself, Ivy declared. Our eyes then turned to little Hannah. She was watching us warily. She resembled her mother in her cute features. We couldn't bear the thought of turning away my anxious niece because of her mother, so we decided to welcome Ivy for the time being. Thanks. I'll go buy some essentials for living. Wait a minute. But Ivy had already left, leaving us with a subdued Hannah and an awkward atmosphere. I'm Sebastian Smith. What's your name? I'm Hannah Johnson. Nice to meet you. I've got some games, let's play. That's when Sebastian kindly spoke to Hannah, breaking the tension. That helped Hannah to gradually let go of her caution. Following this, Ivy essentially began freeloading at our parents' house. Whenever I called, I'd hear how much she was troubling everyone. Looks like going back to our parents' house isn't an option anymore, I thought, feeling like I had lost my refuge. And now, unable to divorce Mark, I sighed. Sebastian looked up at me, concerned. Why are you sighing? One day, when I sighed, Mark asked what was wrong. I told him about Ivy, and all he said was, huh? His indifference to my worries was evident. He wasn't interested in listening seriously. Why don't you just help your sister out? Mark said to me, obviously not taking the situation seriously, and I couldn't help but feel annoyed. As I was about to retort, the doorbell rang. Ah, there she is. Ivy? I exclaimed as I opened the door, only to find my sister and niece standing there. Apparently, Ivy had gotten our address from our parents and decided to drop by. I've got something urgent to take care of. Please look after Hannah for me, she said, leaving her daughter with us before I could even respond. Wait a minute. Is that the infamous sister? I called out, but she was already gone. And Mark showed up. He watched the whole scene unfold. Yes, that's her. I'll have a word with her when she comes to pick up Hannah. Surprised by his words, I looked at Mark. I decided to let him handle it, though I was a bit surprised by his offer. Even though Ivy abruptly left Hannah with us, it meant we could avoid visiting Mark's parents' house. Sebastian kindly engaged with Hannah, and they started playing together, lightening the mood. I watched them play, wondering why Mark was in such a good mood. Hey sis. Ivy's here to pick up Hannah. I'll handle it. You stay with Sebastian. As it became dark outside, my sister arrived. Mark, who had taken care of Hannah, returned in an even better mood after dealing with her arrival. She's quite understanding. Said it was just an emergency this time and she'll be more careful in the future. Really? I replied, a bit skeptical, but after that day, Ivy stopped coming to our house. She also seemed to have calmed down at our parents' house. Meanwhile, Mark started working late and going on sudden business trips, saying I've been busy these days. Since Mark had explained to his parents that he was too busy to visit, I didn't have to go there anymore, but I still found it suspicious. It was right around that time. Next weekend, I have to go on a business trip. It's going to be a bit longer this time. Oh, really? Take care. Mark was scheduled to go on a business trip for about a week. I said, smiling, though I still had my doubts. Hey, can I come over? I called my parents, learning that Ivy was away. I decided to take Sebastian and visit them. Sebastian immediately invited Hannah to play. It seemed that Hannah had warmed up to Sebastian, as she happily accepted his invitation with a smile. Welcome back. I'm sorry we couldn't be of more help. It's okay. I never expected Ivy to return like this. Hey, you too. Look at the TV. Dad suddenly called us over to the television. There was news of a plane crash. How terrible. Looks like there are a lot of injured. The victims had been rescued, but it seemed most of them were seriously injured. As my mother and I were expressing our concerns, I received a call from an unknown number on my smartphone. Hello? Yes, Mark Smith is my husband. What? How come? What happened? It's Mark. He was on that plane and has been rushed to the hospital. The call was from the hospital. I left Sebastian with my parents and hurried to the hospital. Amidst the plane crash, which resulted in some fatalities, it appeared that Mark had survived but sustained serious injuries. I'm Mark Smith's wife. Mrs. Smith, right this way, please. A nurse guided me to his room. There was Mark, lying in the hospital bed. Mark! Hey Hazel! Surprisingly, Mark seemed quite lively. I asked for details. And I found out that he had become paralyzed from the waist down. The worst part is that it was supposed to be a romantic trip with my lover. Lover? Yeah, didn't you realize? The business trips were a lie. His words left me frozen in shock. Mark, without any sign of remorse, continued. Both she and I are now paralyzed. You're the only one who can take care of us. What are you talking about? My concern for him vanished, replaced by disbelief and fading affection. At the same time, the affection for Mark also disappeared. Please, take care of both of us. I was utterly dismayed by what he said. It was absurd to think that he expected me to take care of his mistress as well. Why don't you ask your parents? What? Make my elderly parents take care of us? You're heartless. Oh, your mother-in-law would probably be happy to do it, right? And what position are you in to say such things? Despite being in a position to ask for help, Mark maintained his arrogant demeanor. It made me wonder why I ever fell for him. Excuse me, coming through. A new bed was wheeled in. I looked over and gasped in shock. What? Ivy? It was someone I knew all too well. She had apparently been brought to the same room because she was with Mark. The woman there, Mark's mistress who had been brought in alongside him, was none other than Ivy, my own sister. You were Mark's lover? I glared at her as she looked away. Mark, unabashed, explained. Ivy and he had exchanged contacts the day she left Hannah with us. And they had been meeting on his supposed overtime and business trips. Hearing this, my anger reached its peak. So, you two betrayed us, got into a plane crash, and now you want me to take care of you? You've got some nerve, I said, contemplating what to do next. Mark then spoke up reluctantly. We're family, so you should help us out, right? Please, big sis. Ivy added, both of them pleading with me. As they clung to me, I decided to speak my mind. I decided it was time to speak my mind. To you, family seems to be just a convenience. It's not like that. So what do you consider a family, Mark? A father who doesn't actively participate in parenting and forces his son to go places he doesn't want to? I countered, and Mark fell silent, finally realizing my anger. My gaze then turned to Ivy. You've always wanted what others had, even going as far as stealing boyfriends, making everyone dislike you. And who's always had to clean up your mess? Me and our parents. Is that your idea of family? Well, at least you two won't be able to cheat anymore. Why don't you just stay together? I suggested, both of them stunned by my anger. The nurses, who had been observing us, whispered among themselves. I'll explain things to both families. But from now on, you need to figure things out yourselves. I said and left the room. I then explained the situation to both families. My parents refused to take Ivy back, calling it her just deserts. It's enough, we can't deal with more, they said. Mark's parents, pitying their son, decided to take him in after some persuasion from his mother. Oh, and I'm filing for divorce, so don't rely on me. The in-laws pleaded with me to reconsider. It wasn't me who countered him, but Sebastian. Grandma and Grandpa are the worst. You don't care about Mom at all. His words turned Mark's mother pale. While she tried to make excuses, neither Sebastian nor I were interested in hearing more. Further investigation revealed that Mark had been unfaithful for a long time, starting around when I quit my job. The beginning of it all was around the time I left my job due to the marriage. He had suggested I take maternity leave because it made his affairs easier. The reason he wanted me to quit was that his affair partner worked at the same company, and quitting would prevent the affair from being discovered. Felt quite taken for granted, haven't I? I mused, taking the divorce papers and investigation results to the hospital. Mark and Ivy, now subdued and shunned. They, looked coldly by the nursing staff who were listening to our conversation, were taken aback when I arrived. File this. Wait! If you divorce me, the in-laws will take care of you. I replied, ignoring their pleas and proceeding with the divorce. I then returned home with Sebastian. Now, the problem is. Left at our family home was Hannah. She was a victim in all this. So I discussed with my parents. Then my parents hired a detective to find Hannah's father. We eventually located Silas, Hannah's father, and arranged a meeting. Thank you for contacting me. I've always been concerned about my daughter. Silas said. It turns out that he and Ivy had divorced due to her infidelity. He had tried to claim custody, but a mediator believed the child should be with her mother. As a result, Silas lost custody. About Ivy. I explained Ivy's current situation to Silas. He apologized for any inconvenience caused. And to my surprise, he didn't seem like someone who would elope. So, I asked him about it. Actually, she first approached me using your name, Silas revealed. What? I was shocked. Apparently, Ivy had stolen my insurance card to get close to him. Ivy had deceived Silas and made contact with him under false pretenses. Then, after getting pregnant, she demanded they get married. Though I was deceived, I did love Ivy. But more importantly, I still love my daughter, Hannah. I want to take custody of her. I think it's best if you take care of her. And then, I decided to entrust Hannah to Silas's care. When Silas and I returned to my parents' house with Hannah, she greeted him with a big smile and hugged him. We'll be together from now on. Really? I'm so happy. And they left smiling. With Hannah's safety secured, we decided to move. We thought it best not to stay at my parents' house as Mark and Ivy might come looking for us. A detective told me that they actually visited the house once. I had hired a detective to keep an eye on their movements. After being discharged, Mark and Ivy, pushed in wheelchairs by Mark's parents, had tried to visit my parents' house. And they found it empty, so they ended up at Mark's parents' house. Ivy was allowed to stay there because she was Mark's lover. But the elderly couple struggled to provide care, leading to constant arguments. Well, that's to be expected. Mark, Ivy, and even Mark's parents were all selfish. They always tried to enforce their will. There was a balance only because there were people who would tolerate it. Like me and my parents. We were no longer there, so conflict was inevitable. Well, it's no longer my concern. I had no sympathy for them. However, I needed to ensure everything was finalized legally. So I headed to a lawyer's office. A few days later, Sebastian and I went shopping. I'm so happy to be shopping with you, Mom, he said, his excitement evident due to our recent limited outings. As we enjoyed our time, I was suddenly approached by Ivy. Sis! When my sister called out to me, I was taken aback and froze, surprised. Seeing her struggling to push a wheelchair, I instinctively grabbed Sebastian's hand, ready to flee. Where is Hannah? Isn't Hannah with you? Ivy exclaimed. Given that her first concern was about Hannah, I decided to hear her out. We entered a nearby shop to talk. At first, I was staying at Mark's place, but Ivy was in a vulnerable position in that household. Consequently, she felt marginalized and seemed to be bearing the brunt of everyone's frustrations. Amidst this, she started worrying about Hannah. Once she started worrying about her, even though she knew she didn't have the right to see her, Ivy still longed to at least catch a glimpse of her and managed to escape from her in-laws' house. However, without a clear plan, Ivy was aimlessly wandering around the town. That's when I heard Sebastian's voice. She continued, explaining how it led her to us. She was anxious about not seeing Hannah and had approached us in her panic. Hannah is with Silas now. Ivy froze for a moment. Then she smiled in relief. If she's with Silas, she'll be fine. Have you thought about what you're going to do now? There's someone who's willing to help me. This person was a friend she met during her elopement. Her friend worked at a support facility and arranged for Ivy to stay there for a while. Apparently, she had escaped just before someone was scheduled to pick her up the next day. When I called, I got scolded for acting recklessly, but they said they would still come to pick me up. To Ivy, who said this, I presented a document. This is a list of jobs suitable for wheelchair users. What's this? I know you're going through a tough time, but I will be seeking alimony. I see you're remorseful, so I'll allow installment payments. Find yourself a job. Okay, I'm sorry. After her friend arrived, Ivy left with the friend. I thought maybe she could still turn her life around. Sorry for the delay. Let's go shopping, I said to Sebastian, and we left the shop. As we were leaving, we ran into Mark. His parents were nearby, possibly searching for Ivy, and stumbled upon us instead. What do you want? Come on, let's get back together. A family should be together, right? Stop joking. I have no intention of going back to you. Unlike my sister, Mark called out to me out of self-preservation. Disappointed by his self-serving attitude, I glared at him. I expect a lump sum for the alimony and child support. I'm embarrassed that you're my dad. Faced with our cold attitude, Mark froze. We turned our backs on him and left. In comparison, Ivy seems better, I thought as Sebastian and I focused on our shopping. Hazel! Sebastian! Mark called out, but his voice no longer reached me. Later, with the help of a lawyer, I filed for alimony against both of them. Ivy began to pay the alimony. Apparently, she was struggling with a new life and an unfamiliar job. She said she received only minimal help from the friend she had mentioned. I remember, Ivy used to be so sweet and genuine when she was little. Perhaps being pushed to her limits, she had reverted somewhat to her former self. On the other hand, Mark, who was faced with a lump sum alimony demand, also had a hard time. He eventually had to sell his parents' house and use all of their retirement funds to pay the lump sum alimony I demanded. Am I too harsh? After all, he was paralyzed from the waist down. You don't need to worry about it. Right. You simply claimed your rightful dues. My parents reassured me, sensing my slight guilt over the situation. Hannah, now living with Silas, seemed to be happy. According to Silas, she was fond of Sebastian, who had been kind to her. This news brought a smile to my face. Sometime later, I received a letter from Silas. It contained excerpts from a letter Ivy had written to him. I always wanted to be like my big sister. But I realized I could never be her, leading me to self-destructive choices. However, I truly fell in love with you, Silas, and genuinely love Hannah. The letter ended with, I don't deserve to see Hannah or my sister ever again. It seemed that Ivy would not appear before me again. It was her self-imposed punishment. Mom, can I go to my friend's house today? Sure, but make sure you come back before it's late. Even in our new home, Sebastian was making friends and enjoying school. Let's continue to live a peaceful life with our cherished family. With these thoughts in mind, I watched Sebastian energetically run off.